I drove my husband to the airport that morning. I remember the exact song that was playing in the car. I remember the smell of his coffee. I remember the way he kept checking his phone like someone waiting for an important message. At the time, I thought it was work. Eric had told me he was flying to Chicago for a 3-day business conference. Meetings, presentations, dinners with clients. The kind of trip that had become routine in our marriage. 9 years together, and work trips were just part of our life, so I did what wives do. I woke up early. I made him breakfast, and I drove him to the airport. Halfway through the drive, his phone connected to the Bluetooth in my car. That's when the message appeared on the dashboard screen. At first, it was just a notification. Then the words started scrolling across the display. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My eyes flicked to Eric. He didn't notice the message yet. Then another one came through. "Your wife still thinks this is a work trip, right?" My stomach dropped. Because the name attached to the message wasn't a coworker. And the flight I thought he was taking that morning wasn't the flight he was actually on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how that morning started. Because when I drove my husband to the airport, I had no idea I was dropping him off for a trip to see another woman. The ride to the airport. My name is Lauren, and for 9 years, I believed I had a normal marriage. Not perfect. Not dramatic. Just stable. Eric and I met when we were both 27. He worked in corporate consulting, the kind of job that required travel, presentations, conferences in cities I could never keep track of. Chicago 1 month, Denver the next, sometimes Miami. At the beginning, the travel felt exciting. We were still in that stage of marriage where everything felt like progress. Promotions, bigger clients, better hotels. I remember bragging about it to friends. My husband travels all the time for work. It sounded impressive back then. Eventually, it just became routine. The suitcase lived half-packed in the closet. The airport drop-offs became part of our rhythm. Sometimes I'd drive him. Sometimes he'd take an Uber. Sometimes he'd leave before sunrise while I was still asleep. But that morning, I insisted on driving, partly because his flight was early, partly because we hadn't really had time together that week, and partly because something about him had felt distracted. Nothing obvious, just little things. Eric had been checking his phone more than usual, smiling at messages he didn't explain, turning the screen away when I walked past. But I told myself it was work, because when your life looks stable on the outside, your brain tries very hard not to imagine instability. The night before his flight, he packed while I folded laundry on the bed. "Chicago again?" I asked. "Yeah," he said without looking up. "Same conference as last year." I remember making a joke. "Maybe this time you'll actually have time to see the city instead of sitting in hotel ballrooms." He laughed, but it sounded distracted. You know how those things are. Then he zipped his suitcase closed and reached for his phone. Another message, another quick smile. And again, the phone tilted slightly away from me. At the time, I ignored it. Because ignoring small discomforts is something you get very good at inside long marriages. The next morning, my alarm went off at 5. I stumbled into the kitchen and started the coffee maker. Eric came down 20 minutes later, already dressed. Shirt pressed. Laptop bag over his shoulder. He looked polished, efficient, ready for work. But there was something restless in the way he moved. He checked his phone again while standing at the counter. Typed something quickly. Then slid the phone into his pocket when he noticed me watching. "You ready?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Flight board's at 7:30. We loaded his suitcase into the trunk. The sky was still gray with early morning light when we pulled out of the driveway. For the first 10 minutes, the drive was quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just sleepy. The radio played softly. Eric stared out the window. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled it out quickly, read the message, and smiled. Not a work smile. Not the polite expression people make when they see an email from a colleague. This was softer, almost private. I noticed it. Of course I did. But I didn't say anything. Instead, I focused on the road and told myself what every spouse tells themselves when they notice something strange. It's probably nothing. About halfway to the airport, the car's Bluetooth system activated. Eric's phone had connected automatically. It always did. Usually it just meant music would start playing from his playlist. But that morning, something else appeared on the dashboard screen. A notification banner. At first, I barely looked at it. Just a flash of text while I was driving. Then the car read the message aloud. New message received. And the words appeared on the screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. My hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. Eric didn't notice the message yet. He was looking down at something in his bag. For a moment, my brain tried to process what I'd just seen. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe someone from the conference. Maybe. Then another notification appeared. And this one was impossible to misunderstand. Your wife still thinks this is a work trip, right? I felt the air leave my lungs. The words sat there on the screen for 3 long seconds before disappearing. Eric's head snapped up. Did you see? He started, but the message was already gone. I forced my voice to sound normal. See what? He studied my face. Trying to read something. Trying to decide how much I'd seen. Then he relaxed slightly. Nothing, he said, and slipped his phone out of his pocket. His fingers moved quickly over the screen. Deleting something. Replying to someone. I kept driving. My heart was pounding now, but outwardly, everything about me stayed calm. Because once you see something like that, you have 2 choices. You confront it immediately, or you start collecting information. And something in my gut told me this moment was too early, so I stayed quiet. We pulled into the airport drop-off lane 15 minutes later. Eric grabbed his suitcase from the trunk. He leaned down to the window and kissed me goodbye. See you Sunday, he said. The same words he'd used before every other work trip. I forced a smile. Good luck with the conference. He waved once and disappeared into the sliding glass doors. For a few seconds, I sat there watching the entrance. Watching people come and go. Watching the space where my husband had just walked away. Then I looked down at the dashboard screen again. The messages were gone, but the feeling in my chest wasn't, because I knew something Eric didn't realize yet. The Bluetooth system in my car had synchronized with his phone, which meant the notifications I saw that morning weren't the only things it had stored. And the moment I opened the message history, my entire marriage started to look very different. The destination. He didn't tell me. I didn't leave the airport parking lot right away. At first, I told myself I was just catching my breath. Airports have that strange effect on people. Everything moves quickly around you. Suitcases rolling, announcements echoing through the terminals, people hugging goodbye or rushing toward security. And suddenly you realize you're sitting completely still. That was me. Engine off. Hands still on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead, trying to replay the last 20 minutes in my head. The messages, the way Eric's expression had changed when he realized something had appeared on the dashboard. The speed with which he grabbed his phone, deleting, typing, erasing evidence before I could ask questions. And the line that kept replaying in my mind like a broken recording. Your wife still thinks this is a work trip, right? My stomach twisted. Because the message didn't sound flirtatious. It sounded coordinated, like the sender already knew the story Eric had told me, which meant one thing. This wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. For a few minutes, I just sat there letting that thought settle. Then something else occurred to me. Eric always booked his flights through the same airline, same loyalty program, same account. And for the last few years, because we traveled together occasionally, his airline app had also been logged into my phone. We'd never bothered removing it. At the time it felt convenient. Now it felt like the first crack in a wall I hadn't realized was hiding something. My hands were slightly shaky when I pulled my phone out of my purse. I opened the airline app. For a moment the screen just loaded. Blue circles spinning, my heart pounding louder with every second. Then the flight details appeared. Passenger name, Eric Caldwell. Departure, 6:50 a.m. Destination, Miami. I stared at the word for several seconds. Miami, not Chicago. Chicago was where the conference was supposed to be. Chicago was where his company event was happening. Chicago was where he had told me, twice, that he would be spending the next 3 days. But the ticket on the screen in front of me was very clear. Miami. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because my brain was trying to reconcile 2 completely incompatible versions of reality. Either the airline app was wrong, or my husband had just lied to my face while kissing me goodbye. And the strange thing about moments like that is how quickly the mind starts searching for explanations that still allow the world to make sense. Maybe he had a layover. Maybe the company changed the conference location. Maybe I clicked the flight details. No connection, no layover. Just one direct flight. New York to Miami. Departure in 20 minutes. And then I noticed something else. The seat number, 12A, which wouldn't have meant anything to me if I hadn't kept reading. Because right beneath it, another passenger was listed. 12B, 2 seats booked together. My pulse started racing again. I clicked the second name. For a second, the screen didn't show the full information. Just an initial. Then the rest of it loaded. Maya Torres. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand the letters, but because my brain was desperately searching for a reason that name might belong there. Maybe she was a colleague. Maybe she worked at the same company. Maybe, then I remembered something. The message, the one that had appeared on the dashboard. The name attached to it. Maya. My throat felt suddenly dry. I leaned back in the seat and stared through the windshield. People were still rushing toward the terminal. Families hugging goodbye. Business travelers adjusting their jackets as they hurried inside. Everything looked normal, which somehow made the moment feel even more unreal, because somewhere inside that building, my husband was walking toward a gate. Not to attend a business conference, not to meet clients, but to board a flight with a woman who had just asked if I still believed his story. I closed my eyes for a moment, and for a brief second, I considered doing the simplest thing possible, driving home, pretending I hadn't seen anything, waiting until Sunday, letting Eric come back from Miami with whatever lies he had prepared, because confronting something like this means stepping into a version of your life that you never planned to live. But then another thought surfaced. If he had booked the flight with her, if the messages were that open, if she already knew about me, then this probably wasn't their first trip, which meant the truth about my marriage wasn't something that had just started that morning. It had probably been unfolding for a long time. Quietly, carefully, behind my back. I opened my eyes again and looked down at the phone. The flight status had updated. Boarding, gate C14. I checked the time. He would already be in the security line. Maybe even through it. Maybe already sitting at the gate with her, waiting to board. And suddenly something inside me shifted. Because if my husband thought I was just going to drive home and remain the woman who believed every convenient explanation, he didn't know me nearly as well as he thought he did. I started the car again. But instead of heading toward the highway, I pulled into a short-term parking space near the terminal. My heart was beating faster now, not from fear, from adrenaline, because there's a strange clarity that happens when the illusion of your life collapses. You stop worrying about whether you're overreacting. You stop worrying about whether you misunderstood something. You start wanting answers. Real ones. I grabbed my purse and stepped out of the car. The early morning air was cold. The terminal doors slid open automatically as I approached. Inside, the airport buzzed with the quiet chaos of early flights. Rolling suitcases, coffee stands, people scanning departure boards. I walked straight toward the security checkpoint, not to go through it, just close enough to see the line. My eyes moved across the crowd. Searching, because if Eric was flying to Miami with Maya, there was a very real chance they had already met inside. Maybe they walked in together. Maybe they were standing right next to each other now. And if that was true, I wanted to see it. Not because it would make the situation better, but because once you've seen the truth with your own eyes, no one can ever convince you it didn't happen. For several minutes, I scanned every face in the line. Men in suits, women with carry-on bags, families with sleepy children. Then I saw him. Eric stood about halfway through the security line, suitcase at his feet, phone in his hand, looking relaxed. Relieved even, the way people look when they believe a lie has worked. But he wasn't alone. Standing right beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed every few seconds, was a woman with long dark hair. She was laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Comfortable, familiar, like this wasn't the first time they'd stood in an airport line together. And in that moment, watching my husband smile at another woman while preparing to board a flight I wasn't supposed to know about, one thought became painfully clear. Eric hadn't just planned a secret trip. He had built an entire second life. And the most shocking part wasn't that he had a mistress. It was how confident he seemed that I would never discover her. The woman in seat 12B. For a moment, I just stood there, not moving, not breathing, watching my husband laugh with a woman he had clearly known for much longer than a business trip would allow. When you imagine discovering something like this, you picture anger, a confrontation, a dramatic scene, but the first emotion that actually hits you is something else entirely: disorientation. Because the man standing 20 feet away from me didn't look like a stranger. He looked exactly like the husband I had breakfast with that morning. Same jacket, same leather laptop bag, same relaxed posture, but the way he was standing next to that woman told a completely different story. Their bodies leaned toward each other slightly when they talked. They shared the kind of quiet smiles people develop after months of private conversations. At one point, she reached over and adjusted the strap of his carry-on bag. The movement was automatic, comfortable, familiar, like she had done it before. And in that moment, I realized something that made the situation even worse. This wasn't a new affair. You don't travel together like that the first time you cross a line. You don't stand that comfortably beside someone you've just started seeing. Whatever was happening between Eric and this woman had been happening for a while. The security line moved forward. Eric stepped ahead. She followed. And for a second, they disappeared behind a group of passengers. I felt my heart jump. Because once they passed through security, I wouldn't be able to follow them anymore. I would be locked outside the truth. Unless I did something now. My brain started calculating quickly. I wasn't flying anywhere. I didn't have a boarding pass, but I did know exactly where their flight was leaving from. Gate C14. The departure boards hung above the main hall. I turned and walked quickly toward them. My eyes scanned the rows of flights until I found it. Flight 842. Miami Gate C14. Boarding. My pulse quickened. Because if they were already through security, they would be heading there now. I checked the time. Boarding had just started, which meant they were probably still nearby, still walking toward the gate, still close enough that I might see something else, something that confirmed what my instincts were already screaming. I moved toward the escalators leading to the viewing area above the gates. It wasn't inside security, but it overlooked part of the terminal corridor, enough to see the flow of passengers moving toward different gates. The escalator ride lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like an hour, because every second brought me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted fully confirmed. When I reached the top, I stepped toward the railing. From there, I could see a large stretch of the terminal floor below. Passengers walking, people waiting in small clusters, gate signs glowing above rows of chairs, and then I saw them again. Eric and the woman were walking side by side toward Gate C14. This time there was no crowd between them. No distance. Her hand brushed against his again. And instead of moving away, he took it, not in a dramatic, romantic gesture, just a quiet, casual interlocking of fingers, like something that had become natural between them. My stomach twisted, because that one small gesture told me more than any message ever could. You don't hold someone's hand like that if they're just a coworker. You don't look that relaxed if you're worried about getting caught. You act like that when you believe the world around you has no idea what you're doing. Eric stopped for a moment near a coffee stand. She leaned slightly against the counter while he ordered something. The two of them stood close enough that their shoulders touched. When he handed her the cup, she smiled up at him. And then she kissed his cheek, quick, soft, familiar, the kind of kiss that belongs to a relationship. Not a secret, not a mistake, a relationship. I felt something inside my chest collapse quietly, because until that moment, some part of my brain had still been trying to negotiate with reality. Maybe the messages were misleading, maybe they were flirting, maybe, but there was no misinterpreting what I was watching now. Eric wasn't just cheating. He was comfortable doing it. Comfortable enough to travel with her. Comfortable enough to stand in a crowded airport and act like they were any other couple heading on vacation. They started walking again, closer now to the gate area. And suddenly I realized something else. I still didn't actually know who she was. I knew her first name from the messages, Maya, but nothing else. No last name, no job, no explanation for how she had entered my husband's life. And if this affair had been going on for months, maybe longer, then the truth was probably much bigger than one airport trip. I pulled my phone out again. My hands were steadier now, not because I felt calm, but because something inside me had shifted from shock to focus. If Eric had been careless enough to let messages appear on my car dashboard, then he had probably been careless in other places too. People who live double lives eventually start leaving trails. You just have to know where to look. I opened the airline app again, scrolled back to the flight details, passenger list. There it was again. Seat 12A, Eric Caldwell. Seat 12B, Maya Torres. Now I had a full name, which meant I could do something Eric clearly hadn't expected me to do. I opened a search bar, typed it in, and within seconds, the internet started answering questions Eric probably never imagined I would ask. Social media profiles appeared first. The top one had a profile photo, dark hair. Same woman I had just watched kiss my husband in an airport terminal. Her page was public, which meant I could see almost everything. Photos, posts, tagged locations. I scrolled slowly. Vacation pictures, restaurant selfies, friends commenting under her photos. And then I saw something that made my stomach drop all over again. Because one of the pictures wasn't new. It was from 8 months earlier. The caption read, "Best weekend in Miami." I stared at the image. The background looked like a hotel balcony, palm trees, ocean view. And even though Eric wasn't visible in the frame, the reflection in the sliding glass door behind her told a very different story. Because in that reflection, standing just out of the camera's focus, was a man wearing a blue shirt I recognized immediately. Eric owned exactly one shirt that color. I had bought it for him last Christmas, which meant something far worse than a secret airport trip had just revealed itself. Eric wasn't flying to Miami to start an affair. He was flying there to continue one. And judging by the photo timestamp, he had already taken this exact trip before, without me ever knowing. I leaned back against the railing and looked down toward gate C14 again. Eric and Maya were sitting now, side by side, talking quietly, waiting for boarding to begin. And suddenly the entire timeline of my marriage started rearranging itself in my mind. Every conference, every late return flight, every unexplained weekend trip, all of it started fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I had never realized existed. But the worst part wasn't the lies. It was the realization that Eric had done something incredibly risky, something that suggested he was completely certain I would never find out. Because bringing his mistress to the airport, flying with her, holding her hand in public, only works if you believe your wife will never be close enough to see it. And the thing Eric didn't realize yet was that his biggest mistake that morning wasn't the flight. It was letting his phone connect to my car. The first time I realized it wasn't new. I stayed in that viewing area longer than I meant to. Not because I thought something dramatic was going to happen, but because once you've seen the truth about something important in your life, your brain keeps searching for confirmation. It wants more proof, more pieces, more evidence that what you're seeing is real. Below me, at gate C14, Eric and Maya looked completely comfortable, like two people who had done this before. They weren't whispering nervously. They weren't looking over their shoulders. They weren't acting like they were hiding. They looked relaxed. That was the part that hurt the most, because secrecy leaves certain traces. Tension, awkwardness, distance. But the way they sat together told a completely different story. Eric leaned toward her slightly while they talked. At one point she laughed and rested her head briefly against his shoulder. He didn't move away. He didn't hesitate. His hand slid across the armrest and covered hers. Just like that. Natural. Unthinking. Like muscle memory. And that's when the realization hit me harder than anything I'd seen so far. You don't build that kind of comfort in a few weeks. You build it over time. Months. Maybe longer. Which meant the moment I thought I had just discovered wasn't the beginning of their story. It was just the first moment I had finally seen it. I pulled my phone back out and opened Maya's profile again. If she was careless enough to keep her page public, then she had probably been careless about other things too. I started scrolling further back. Photo after photo. Selfies in restaurants. Weekend brunch pictures. Girls' night captions. Nothing unusual. Nothing that immediately connected her to Eric, until I reached a post from 11 months earlier. The caption read, "Back in my favorite city." The location tag, Miami Beach. My chest tightened, because the photo wasn't just a selfie. It was taken from a hotel balcony overlooking the ocean, a very distinctive view. Tall white hotel tower across the street. 2 palm trees framing the railing. The kind of background you only see at certain resorts. And suddenly something in my memory clicked, because I had seen that view before. Not in person. In a photo Eric had sent me last year. A photo he had taken from a hotel room during one of his conferences. I could still remember the text message he sent with it. "Wish you were here. View isn't bad." At the time, I thought it was sweet. Now it felt like someone had quietly replaced the ground beneath my feet. Because the photo on Maya's page and the photo Eric had sent me months ago were taken from the same balcony, the same hotel, the same room, which meant something I hadn't wanted to consider before. Eric hadn't just lied about this trip. He had probably been lying about many of them. I zoomed in on Maya's picture, looking carefully at the glass doors behind her, and there it was again. A reflection. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. A man standing inside the room, holding a phone, taking the photo. The same blue shirt, the same one I had bought him, the same shirt I had seen him pack for this trip. I felt the air leave my lungs slowly, because there was no longer any version of reality where this was accidental. No misunderstanding, no confusing coincidence. Eric had been traveling to Miami with this woman for at least 11 months, maybe longer. And every time he did it, he came home and told me about meetings, conferences, client dinners. I leaned my head back against the railing and closed my eyes for a moment, not because I felt like crying, but because my brain was suddenly replaying dozens of small memories, moments that had seemed ordinary before. Now they looked completely different. Eric coming home late from work dinners. Eric texting someone constantly during certain trips. Eric smiling at his phone in ways that never quite made sense. At the time, each moment had been small enough to ignore, but now, they lined up perfectly, like a trail I had been walking beside for months without realizing where it led. I opened my eyes again and looked down at the gate. Boarding had started. Passengers were lining up. Eric and Maya stood with the rest of them. She adjusted the strap of her bag. He rested a hand briefly on the small of her back, guiding her forward in line. The gesture was quiet, subtle, but painfully familiar, because it was the same way Eric used to guide me through crowded places. Restaurants, airports, concert venues, the small protective touch of a husband who cared. Except now he was doing it for someone else. They moved forward together, step by step, until they reached the gate scanner. Maya went first. She handed over her boarding pass. The gate agent scanned it. Green light. Then Eric stepped forward. Another scan. Another green light. Just like that, they walked down the jet bridge. Together, toward a flight I was never supposed to know existed. For a long moment, I stayed where I was, watching the empty gate area, trying to absorb the reality of what I had just seen, and that's when something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling broken, I felt something colder, clearer, because once the illusion of your life disappears, you stop worrying about protecting it. You start thinking about what comes next. I looked down at my phone again. Maya's profile was still open. I scrolled a little further, and then I saw something that made my heart beat faster again. Because buried among the photos and captions, there was a check-in post from 2 months earlier. The location tag read, "The Shoreline Hotel, Miami Beach," the same hotel balcony, the same palm trees, the same ocean view. But the caption underneath the photo said something that made my stomach twist all over again. Same room, same view, same person. I stared at the screen, because suddenly the timeline became very clear. This wasn't a secret trip Eric had planned once. It was something he had repeated, over and over. And the person who knew that better than anyone was the woman sitting beside him on that plane. The woman who had written a message asking if his wife still believed the story. I looked down at the now empty gate one last time, and the strangest thought crossed my mind. Eric believed that this trip was just another successful lie, another weekend he could erase before coming home Sunday night. But the truth was, his entire secret life had just collapsed because of one tiny mistake. He let his phone connect to my car, and once that happened, I had seen everything I needed to see. But what Eric didn't know yet was that the real consequences of that mistake hadn't even started. The timeline I was never supposed to see. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked slowly back down the escalator and out through the glass doors of the terminal. The morning air felt colder than it had earlier, even though the sun had finally started to rise over the parking structures. Everything outside looked exactly the same as it had when I arrived. Cars pulling into the drop-off lanes, people unloading suitcases, taxi drivers waving for passengers. The normal rhythm of an airport morning, except my life had quietly shifted into something completely different. I reached my car and sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes before turning the engine on. My hands were steady now, not because the situation felt less serious, but because shock had started to settle into something else. Focus. When something like this happens, the first instinct is confrontation. Calling him, texting him, demanding an explanation. But that instinct usually comes from emotion. And emotion is exactly what someone living a double life expects. What they don't expect is patience. So instead of driving home, I opened my phone again. Maya's social media page was still open. Her photos now felt less like casual posts and more like evidence, clues, pieces of a timeline Eric had carefully hidden from me. I started scrolling backward, not looking for emotional moments, looking for patterns. The first thing I noticed was how often Miami appeared. Not constantly, but regularly enough to matter. 11 months ago, 8 months ago, 5 months ago, 2 months ago. Each time, a similar caption. Something vague, something playful, something that sounded romantic without explicitly saying why. The locations were different restaurants, different beaches, different hotel balconies, but the background view in several photos was identical. The same hotel tower across the street, the same palm trees, the same ocean. And suddenly the pieces began to fall into place in a way that made my stomach tighten, because every one of those dates matched something in my memory. A conference, a training weekend, a client retreat, trips Eric had told me about casually, trips I had helped him pack for, trips where I kissed him goodbye and told him to have a good meeting. Except now I knew something that changed the meaning of every one of those moments. Eric hadn't been traveling for work. He had been traveling for her. I opened my calendar app, scrolled through the past year, checking the dates of his business trips. Then I compared them with the timestamps on Maya's posts. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to erase any remaining doubt. At least 4 times in the past year, Eric had taken the exact same trip. Same city, same hotel, same woman. And every time he did it, he came home and slid back into our life like nothing had happened. I leaned back in the seat and stared at the ceiling of the car for a moment, because suddenly, the scale of the deception felt larger than the airport scene I had just witnessed. This wasn't just an affair. It was a system, a routine, a second relationship carefully scheduled around the first one, and the worst part was realizing how easy it had been for him, how effortlessly he had moved between 2 lives, one with me and one with her. I opened Maya's profile again and looked at her photos more carefully. She looked happy in almost all of them. Relaxed, confident, like someone who believed she was exactly where she wanted to be. There was no trace of secrecy in her posts. No nervous captions, no hidden angles. If anything, the pictures felt proud, and that realization led to a thought that made my chest tighten again. What if she wasn't the one hiding? What if Eric was the only person pretending this relationship was a secret? Because if Maya knew about me, if she knew he was married, then the dynamic between them was very different than the one I had imagined. I clicked on the comments under one of her photos. Friends writing things like, "Girl, you deserve this happiness. Finally seeing you glow. About time he took you somewhere nice." My heart skipped. He. The word appeared again and again in the comments, not by name, but clearly referring to someone the people in her life already knew existed, which meant something I hadn't considered yet. Eric's relationship with Maya might not have been secret to everyone. It might have only been secret to one person, me. The thought sent a strange wave of calm through my body, because once you realize you're the only one being kept in the dark, the humiliation transforms into something else. Clarity. I looked down at the airline app again. The flight status had changed. Departed. Somewhere over the Atlantic coastline now, Eric and Maya were probably sitting side by side, drinking coffee, talking about their plans for the weekend, maybe even laughing about how smoothly the morning had gone, how easy it had been for him to kiss his wife goodbye and walk straight into the arms of another woman. And for the first time since seeing those messages on my dashboard, I felt something other than shock, a quiet determination forming in the background of my thoughts, because Eric believed something very important about me. He believed I would react emotionally. He believed I would panic, cry, call him immediately, demand explanations while he was 30,000 feet in the air. But the truth was, the longer I sat in that parking lot looking at the evidence in front of me, the more I realized something. The real power in this situation belonged to the person who knew the most. And right now, that person was me. Eric thought he was leaving for a secret trip. But what he didn't know was that I had just uncovered almost a year of lies in less than an hour. I started the car and pulled slowly out of the parking space. The drive home was strangely calm. Traffic was light. The morning sun had fully risen now, turning the windows of office buildings gold. It felt like an ordinary weekday, except for one detail. By the time Eric's plane landed in Miami, I would know far more about his second life than he ever intended me to. And the most dangerous moment in any secret relationship is the moment the wrong person finally understands the whole story, the second life I was never supposed to see. By the time I got home, the house felt unfamiliar, not because anything had physically changed. The same couch sat against the wall. The same framed photos lined the hallway. Eric's coffee mug was still sitting on the kitchen counter where he'd left it that morning. But the meaning of everything around me had shifted, because once you realize someone you love has been lying to you for months, maybe longer, you start looking at your entire life like a crime scene. Every object becomes a clue. Every memory becomes a question. I set my keys on the counter and opened my laptop. If Eric had managed to maintain a relationship with another woman for nearly a year, there had to be more evidence somewhere. People who live double lives rarely keep everything perfectly separated. Eventually, the lines blur. And when they do, things start slipping through the cracks. The first place I checked was our shared credit card account. Eric and I had always kept separate personal accounts, but we used one card for most household expenses: groceries, gas, travel bookings. At the time, it felt practical. Now it felt like an open window into something he probably assumed I would never bother examining closely. I logged in. The page loaded slowly. Rows of transactions filled the screen. Most of them were exactly what I expected. Restaurants near Eric's office, gas stations, office supply stores, normal things. But then I filtered the list by location. Miami. 5 transactions appeared. 5. My pulse quickened as I clicked the first one. Shoreline Hotel. $642 date. 8 months ago. I felt the same cold wave of recognition I had felt earlier in the airport viewing area, because that hotel name matched the location tag on Maya's photo. I clicked the next charge. Ocean Terrace Restaurant. 184 same date. Same weekend. I opened a new tab and searched the restaurant. The images appeared instantly. A candlelit oceanfront patio. Small tables. Couples sitting close together under string lights. The kind of place people go when they want to feel romantic, not when they're attending a corporate conference. I leaned back in my chair slowly, because the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Eric hadn't just been traveling to Miami with Maya. He had been paying for those trips with money from an account we both used. Our account, which meant every dinner, every hotel stay, every weekend getaway, had quietly been financed by the same card we used to buy groceries. The humiliation of that realization hit differently than the betrayal itself. Cheating is one thing, but building a second relationship using shared resources, using the life you built with someone else as the financial foundation for it, felt like something even colder. I scrolled further. Another charge. 3 months ago. Shoreline Hotel, $711, same place, same pattern. Hotel Friday night, restaurant Saturday, bar Saturday evening. The receipts told the story of an entire weekend. A weekend Eric had told me was spent attending networking events and client dinners. But the timeline of transactions said something else, because there was one detail that kept appearing in each of those weekends: a breakfast charge. Late, around 10:30 a.m., at the hotel cafe, which meant Eric hadn't been waking up early to attend morning conference sessions. He had been sleeping in, with her. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because the realization surprised me anymore, but because each new piece of information made the scale of the deception clearer. Eric hadn't been sneaking around nervously. He had been living comfortably inside two separate worlds, and he had structured his life in a way that allowed both to exist without ever touching. Until this morning. Until one careless moment when his phone connected to my car. I opened another browser tab and typed Maya Torres's name again. This time I went deeper, scrolling through older posts, looking at tagged photos, mutual friends, work connections. It didn't take long to find what I needed. Her LinkedIn profile appeared halfway down the results. I clicked it. Her job title loaded. Marketing consultant. Company name. My stomach tightened. Because it was the same company Eric worked for. Not a different department. Not a partner firm. The same company. Which meant something else became immediately clear. They hadn't met randomly. They hadn't met online. They hadn't met through friends. They had met at work. Probably in the same building. Probably in the same meetings. And at some point, that professional connection had quietly turned into something else. I scrolled through her job history. She had joined the company 14 months ago. 14 months. Which meant the timeline suddenly made even more sense. Eric's first conference trip to Miami had happened 11 months ago, 3 months after she started working there. Plenty of time for an office relationship to form. Plenty of time for private lunches, private conversations, private decisions, and suddenly, another memory surfaced in my mind. One I had barely registered at the time. About a year ago, Eric had mentioned a new person joining their team, marketing consultant. He said casually during dinner. Seems smart. She'll probably help with the client presentations. I remembered asking what her name was. And Eric had shrugged. Maya, I think. At the time, it meant nothing. Just another coworker. Just another name from the endless list of people Eric worked with. Now that small conversation felt like the opening line of a story I hadn't realized I was already inside. I leaned forward again and opened Eric's email account. Not because I had ever wanted to spy on him, but because after 9 years of marriage, we had shared passwords for convenience, travel bookings, bills, subscriptions, the kind of practical sharing that only feels dangerous when trust disappears. The inbox loaded. Most messages were exactly what you'd expect from someone working in consulting. Client updates, meeting schedules, travel confirmations. But when I searched the word Miami, several emails appeared, all from the same hotel, all confirming reservations. And the guest information listed for those reservations said something very interesting. 2 guests, Eric Caldwell, Maya Torres. I sat back slowly in the chair, because now the story was completely clear. Eric hadn't just lied to me once. He had built an entire routine around those lies. Work trip, conference, client meeting, every excuse carefully designed to give him just enough distance to disappear for a weekend. And the woman he disappeared with was someone he saw almost every day at work. Someone who probably watched him walk back into the office Monday morning, wearing the same wedding ring he wore when he left. Someone who probably knew exactly how little I understood about the life my husband was actually living. I glanced at the clock on my laptop. It had only been 3 hours since I dropped Eric off at the airport. 3 hours. And in that short time, the version of my marriage I thought I had been living inside had completely collapsed. But the strangest part of the morning wasn't the anger. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was the realization that something about the balance of power in the situation had quietly shifted, because Eric believed his secret life was safe. He believed he had left for Miami without consequences. He believed I was at home doing whatever wives do while their husbands attend business conferences. What he didn't know was that while he sat on that plane next to his mistress, I was learning everything. The moment he realized I knew Eric's flight landed in Miami just after noon, I knew that because the airline app was still open on my phone. Every update appeared automatically. Departure, altitude, arrival. By the time the plane touched down, I had already spent several hours reconstructing a version of my husband's life that he had never intended for me to see. Hotel reservations, restaurant charges, photos, emails, an entire timeline that stretched back nearly a year. And the strangest part was how calm I felt now. The shock had passed. The confusion had passed. What remained was something quieter, something colder, clarity. Because once you understand exactly what someone has done, you stop searching for explanations. You start thinking about consequences. I closed the laptop and walked into the kitchen. Eric's coffee mug was still sitting where he left it that morning. Half a ring of dried coffee at the bottom. 9 years of marriage suddenly reduced to something that looked strangely ordinary. I rinsed the mug and placed it in the sink. Then I picked up my phone again. For a moment, I considered calling him, imagining the sound of his voice answering cheerfully, imagining him pretending he had just landed in Chicago, pretending he was heading to his hotel before the conference started. But I didn't call, because confronting someone while they're still in the middle of their lie gives them time to improvise. And Eric was clearly very good at improvising. Instead, I opened the airline app again. The status now read, "Arrived, Miami," which meant he had turned his phone back on. Messages would start flowing again. Plans, logistics, dinner reservations. And sure enough, 10 minutes later, my own phone buzzed. Eric's name appeared on the screen. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I answered. "Hey," he said. His voice sounded exactly the same as it always did after a work flight. Relaxed, confident. "Just landed. Chicago," he almost added. I could hear it hovering in the silence. "How was the flight?" I asked. "Long," he said lightly. "You know how those early flights are." I leaned against the kitchen counter and listened, because the fascinating thing about watching someone lie is how easily the lies come. Eric didn't hesitate, didn't pause, didn't stumble. He had already stepped completely into the story he had prepared. "I'm heading to the hotel now," he continued. "First meeting starts around 4. The hotel." Another lie. I pictured the reservation emails still open on my laptop. The same Miami hotel where he had stayed with Maya multiple times before. "Sounds busy," I said calmly. "Yeah, it's going to be a packed weekend." There was a faint sound in the background. Airport noise, rolling suitcases, voices echoing through the terminal. And then I heard something else. A woman laughing. Close to the phone. Eric must have realized it too, because he cleared his throat quickly. "Anyway," he said, "I'll call you tonight after dinner." Dinner. Probably the same oceanfront restaurant I had already seen on the credit card statement. The same candlelit patio where he had taken her before. My hand tightened slightly around the phone, and that was the moment I decided. Because Eric believed he had complete control over this conversation. He believed the story was still intact. He believed I was still the wife who waved goodbye in the airport drop-off lane and waited patiently at home. He had no idea the entire narrative had collapsed hours ago. So I asked one simple question. "Eric," I said. "Yeah? How's the weather in Miami?" Silence. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But 2 seconds is a very long time when someone suddenly realizes the ground beneath their lie has disappeared. "What?" he said. I let the silence stretch, long enough for the panic to begin forming on the other end of the line. "I asked how the weather is," I said again. "In Miami." Another pause. Longer this time. The airport noise in the background continued. Suitcases rolling, announcements echoing. But Eric didn't speak, because he had just realized something. The one person he believed was completely in the dark wasn't. "Lauren," he said finally. My name sounded different now. Tighter. Careful. "What do you mean?" I smiled faintly to myself, not because the moment felt satisfying, but because the truth had finally caught up to him. I said quietly. "The flight from New York to Miami that just landed." More silence. Then the faint sound of someone speaking near him. A woman's voice. Soft. Asking something I couldn't quite hear. Maya. Eric must have stepped away from her. Because the background noise changed suddenly. Quieter. More private. How do you know that? He asked. The question wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was something else entirely. Fear. And in that moment, I realized something important. Eric had never imagined this possibility. Never imagined the tiny chain of events that had started in my car that morning. One Bluetooth connection, 2 messages appearing on a dashboard screen, and suddenly the entire structure of his secret life had collapsed. I know a lot of things, I said. He didn't respond. So I continued. I know about Miami. I know about the Shoreline Hotel. I know about the weekends. And I know about Maya. Another silence. But this one felt heavier, because now Eric understood the scope of the situation. Not suspicion. Not a guess. Evidence. The kind that doesn't disappear with a clever explanation. Finally, he spoke again. Lauren, we should talk about this when I get home. The sentence sounded fragile, like someone trying to slow down a train that had already left the station. I looked out the kitchen window. The afternoon sun had started reflecting off the glass buildings across the street. Life outside continued normally. Cars passing, people walking dogs, neighbors mowing their lawns. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, except my marriage was no longer the same thing it had been 12 hours earlier. Eric, I said quietly. Yes? You're right. A small breath of relief escaped through the phone, because he thought I meant something else. He thought I meant we would talk later. He thought time was still on his side. But what I said next erased that illusion completely. You're right, I repeated. We will talk when you get home. Another pause. Okay, he said cautiously. And Eric? Yeah? Don't worry about lying anymore. My voice stayed calm, almost gentle. Because by the time you get back from Miami, I'm going to know everything. The trip that ended my marriage. Eric stayed in Miami for 3 days. Not because I asked him to. Not because we had agreed to anything. But because once the truth came out during that phone call, there was nothing left for him to rush back to. We barely spoke during that weekend. A few short messages, logistical things, Caleb's soccer game schedule, a bill that needed to be paid, the kind of conversations people have when the emotional part of a relationship has already collapsed. And in a strange way, those 3 days gave me something I didn't expect. Time. Time to sit inside the reality of what had happened without Eric standing in front of me trying to rewrite it. Because people who live double lives are usually very good at one thing. Narratives. They know how to turn mistakes into misunderstandings, affairs into emotional accidents, months of deception into something that just happened. But distance removes that ability. And during those 72 hours, I realized something important. The airport discovery wasn't actually the moment my marriage ended. It was just the moment I finally saw what had already been broken for a long time. Eric came home Sunday evening. The same airport where I had dropped him off 3 days earlier. Except this time he took a taxi. When he walked through the front door, the house felt strangely quiet. Not tense. Not dramatic. Just finished. He stood in the hallway for a moment, like someone entering a place that no longer belonged to him. His suitcase rolled behind him. His face looked tired. Older. For a second, I wondered if he had spent the entire flight trying to invent a story that could repair what had happened. But when he saw my expression, I think he understood immediately that the version of the conversation he was hoping for wasn't going to happen. Lauren, he said softly. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. The same laptop that still contained every receipt, every email, every reservation confirmation I had found that morning. Before you say anything, I said calmly, there's something you should know. He didn't move. What? I'm not here to argue about whether the affair happened. He exhaled slowly. I know what I did was wrong. I shook my head slightly. That's not the part we're discussing. I turned the laptop screen toward him. Hotel charges, restaurant receipts, reservation confirmations. Almost a year of them. His eyes moved across the screen slowly. The confidence I had seen in the airport terminal days earlier was completely gone now. You went through everything, he said quietly. Yes. He looked down at the floor. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question people always ask when they realize their secrets are no longer secrets. What happens now? I closed the laptop, and for the first time since this started, I allowed myself to answer honestly. Now, I said, you stop pretending this was one mistake. Eric didn't respond, because we both knew the truth. One mistake doesn't involve flights, hotels, entire weekends planned around lies. One mistake doesn't build a second life that runs parallel to the first. I spent 9 years believing our marriage was built on trust, I continued. But what I actually had was a life where I knew half the story. Eric rubbed his face with his hands. I never meant for you to find out like this. The sentence hung in the air for a moment. Then I nodded slowly. I know. And strangely enough, I did. Because the one thing Eric had never planned for was that tiny moment inside my car. The Bluetooth connection. The messages on the dashboard. A small technological accident that revealed an entire hidden world. And the irony of the situation became very clear. Eric thought the most dangerous moment in his affair would be if someone at work noticed, or if Maya demanded something he couldn't give. But the real danger was much simpler than that. It was the moment his phone connected to the wrong car. Because that small mistake didn't just reveal the trip to Miami. It revealed the truth about the man I had been married to. And once you see something like that clearly, you can't go back to believing the version of life that existed before it. The morning I drove Eric to the airport, I thought I was dropping my husband off for a business trip. What I was actually doing was driving him out of my life.